Hey, everybody, welcome to Behind the Bar. I'm your host, Danny Johnson, where I interview your favorite dry bar comedians. With me today, as you can see, the very funny Brandon Skelton. His special, what is it? Having kids wrecked my body, came out recently. I believe I saw, Brandon, it was number 5
Yes, sir.
on in the top 10 there, which I'm jealous. We shouldn't be jealous, right? But mine never hit the top 5. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, what the listeners are really interested in is obviously dry bar comedians, but as a comedian, when you have to put something down on film, what did you do to prepare for this? How'd you lay your set out? Did you take jokes out before or have them edit after? What was the prep time? Because some of the folks listening are comedians looking to do a dry bar. But I think the fans too, non-comedians, are interested in how one preps for a dry bar special.
Yes, sir. Well, so mine came about pretty quick in regards to from the time they gave the invitation to when it actually happened. Now, I'd been trying sending them video for like 3 years, and very thankful they did not invite me during that 3 years because I was not ready. I guess just with their level of expertise, they're like, yeah, this guy needs to polish up a little bit.
Mm,
So several years was trying, but then kind of the connection that happened. I had some friends who had opened for the Huckabee show, and they wasn't able to do a particular weekend, so I got the invitation to fill in since they couldn't, and did that set and went very well. Sent that to Dry Bar, and then a couple weeks later, I get the message from them, hey, would you be interested? So I accepted the invitation probably around August, and then by October I was recording. So there was maybe about 6 weeks in between.
wow.
Um, so yeah, quick turnaround in essence to that. So I know with a lot of guys, and I've had several friends that's gone out there, they prepare the set, they line up events, and they like practice that one set just
Right.
you know systematically for however long they have leading up to it. So with mine, it was more like, okay, I know which jokes I've tried and they've proven themselves and what I want to bring to the table. So I just kind of wrote the set, and I had a time or two that I got to practice it. One of the things they had me do before going out there was I recorded the set pretty much that I would be doing. Now I did add and take some away, but
Right.
the church we attend, they were having a couples banquet. So I said, hey, can I just come in? I need to do about a 25-minute set. Could I do that and then send that to Dry Bar? So it's like, absolutely. So that was my one just official running the set. And then from there, there were some things I took out of it and added to it going into it. So, and that was kind of the prep time. And then kind of the game plan I had going into it was, I wanted some certain things to help me stand out. Somebody was to watch it. Like me and my daughter watches a lot of them together. And so we'll do little callback jokes occasionally
Right.
about things. Like Fred Klett talks about his shirt being hibiscus, or just different ones. Dennis Regan's garbage Stittenford, or Starbucks. So I was like, okay, I need to have a couple things in there. So kind of my brain was, you start off. Rick Roberts give this advice. I took his class, School of Laughs. So before you can make fun of other things, you make fun of yourself.
Right. Right. Right.
You want to get that first laugh in there within the first 20 seconds to kind of win the crowd. And if it's something where you're kind of showing that you got flaws yourself, it helps. So my first joke being, this is a great experience. Wish my wife could be here. I'm married out of my league. In fact, when we're riding around together on date, people think I drive for Uber.
Right. Right.
Well, that's kind of just my, kind of breaks the ice. And then I roll it into a joke about, actually at that time I was managing at Planet Fitness, which for some reason gets more laughs than I feel like it should. And the funny thing about the Planet Fitness stuff, of course, I recently left there and I work with Fellowship of Christian Athletes now. But when I do comedy, I stick with true story stuff, and
Right.
but with all the crazy things that happen and all the stories I tell, it never fails. The one thing people ask me about afterwards, they're like, do you really manage a Planet Fitness? I'm like, out of everything I just said, why
Right.
was that the most difficult to believe? But so yeah, get back to the game plan. So, come out, get a laugh quick, make a little joke about myself. So that way it opens up to make fun of other things and not look like a jerk. Um,
Right.
and then, and I've got a lot of quick rapid fire, just like one line, pop, pop, pop. but I also wanted to make sure to include a couple stories. So that way, when people's like, you need to watch this dry bar special, this is the guy who slipped up and threw shade at a guy with a nub. I'm like, oh yeah, that guy, so there's some different stories I threw in there, but made sure still though, because of the attention span of people, keeping that probably about 90 seconds or less.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah,
some, setup pops, but then there's some little 90-second build, little jokes drifted in there, but just to kind of help us stand out. And then to make sure to mention in there that I pastor a church. I'm a pastor as well. So I did a couple jokes about pastoring, but didn't just camp out there because, in the live audience that you're sitting in,
yeah.
it's not the same church world that I'm used to here in the South. So, but keeping in mind of things that will relate to the general audience because this does go out, on the internet. So
Yeah, yeah. Would you say, as a pastor, you're an experienced public speaker, right? I'm sure that helps with comedy then and confidence of being in front of people.
yes, sir.
Yeah. Would you say you got more? Because I watched your Huckabee set. Great job on that as well.
Thank you.
Would you say you were more nervous for Dry Bar or Huckabee? Because both are filmed, and when something's filmed, that's the pressure is immense for a performer.
Right. So definitely was more nervous, dealt with more nerves, and even noticing because I'm a former coach too. So one of the things I do is I watch my film, like I record and watch and probably watch too much. So if my video went viral, it was probably because three-fourths of it was me watching it, critiquing myself.
Right.
But I was definitely dealing with more nerves at Dry Bar. One, I think the quick turnaround. Um, and two, some of the jokes I'm used to telling in the South and in church settings, they work. But
Yeah.
then when I told them out there, it was like they were still waiting for the punchline. And I was like, oh, that was the punchline. And
Right.
so not letting that get in my head. And I dealt with that a little bit, like watching back through it. I noticed several times where I got on a little nervous tick where I'm saying, and I'm just like kicking
Yeah.
myself, like,
Okay.
oh my goodness, why was I doing that? And then I would get off of it for a little while, but then it might circle back through. Because when you're up there, I say, all right, going back to the Huckabee question, yeah, it's still nervous for the Huckabee setting,
Yeah.
but it was only going to be 5 minutes. So I was like, okay, 5 minutes. But when I'm getting up there and like, okay, I need to do 25 minutes, and I don't have any type of note card or anything sitting there just in case I hang up for a second.
Right.
Also, trying not to let those thoughts get in my head, like, okay, I'm going to say this. How's the internet going to respond? And there's a few moments there where, well, not a few. There was one time in particular where I froze with my follow, and I was
Oh.
just like, and it was just a brief second, but it felt like eternity in that moment. And even watching back on it, it does just look like a comedian gathering his thoughts going on to the next thing. But in that moment, I was like, oh my, I cannot freeze right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, my thoughts hit and ran. Because actually, when I was out there, so we recorded two shows.
Yeah.
And did you guys do an early and late when you was on there?
Yes, but when I did it, there was just two of us because their specials were
Right.
40 minutes.
Yeah. So yeah, we did the two shows. Well, the first show pretty much had to scrap it, and not because of just my set, but there was this person there, God bless them, who had the most high pitched, shrill, overwhelming laugh.
Oh, wow.
And this person has been at a lot of shows. Like there's been several times that I've watched, and you can tell that's the person. So when the guy who opened, they had the opener, Trey Lamb, and then I was the first one up of the three that night.
Right,
But
right.
when he's doing his set, I hear her, and I was just like, no, she's here. She showed up for mine. My arch nemesis that I've never met, but no, great person and just enjoying life and not meaning to be a distraction. But you could just tell in the crowd that as my set progressed in the early show, which was the more more people attended that one, that if she came out of the gate first laughing, that the others would kind of die down quickly because they were kind of getting exhausted with it. Actually, Happy Cole was the one that went on after me, and he just went for her. He just turned her into part of his set and just
Of
started like
course.
going after. But so when I came to the second show, the thought was I need to make this one tight because this is probably going to be the one. And still a great crowd. I mean, it's probably three-fourths full, and they were very engaged, even for it to be a nine. I think it was 9 o'clock or 9:30, something like that. But I told them after the fact, I said, "Hey, let's just use the second set."
Right, right.
We had to take a couple things out there. There was a couple things that was said in the moment, little taglines. I was just like, I don't like that. Can we take that out? And so they did. And they were fantastic in the way they do things. Um, One of the things they did that I got to give them props for. This is So one of my jokes in there I made about my mother-in-law, and I was just saying, how escape rooms, asking how they work, and you pay $20, they lock you in a room, you try to get out in an hour. I'm like,
Right.
well, I ain't doing that. And I said, that sounds like Christmas with my mother-in-law.
Right.
So the unexpected thing that happened was, so recorded October 14th. Well, then she went into, I had no issues with health, but then starting October 31st, went into the hospital, in and out of hospital multiple times, and she actually passed in January.
Oh my.
Yeah, and so, and a lot of people not thinking about the fact that when a special releases, it may have been recorded a year ago.
Sure.
I was like, someone will watch this, and one, I didn't want my family watching it be a difficult moment to deal with, but two, didn't want somebody watching me like, wait a second, this guy made a joke about his mother-in-law. So I reached out to Dry Bar and I said, hey, this is what's happened. Is there any way that you guys could remove that? Because it was actually, um, I found out that mine was going to be releasing because I pulled up the app and it said coming soon, Brandon
Right.
Skelton. I was like, oh, hey, this is right
Right.
around the corner. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, just make sure, can you get this removed? Because I talked to him back before she passed. I said, hey, my mother-in-law has gotten real sick. Can we remove this line? And then when I saw it was coming out, I checked back with him. I said, hey, can we get that out of there? Because it don't need to be. So
Yeah.
I did such a flawless job with the editing, because the biggest laugh actually came from the mother-in-law joke, in the live setting. But they did such a great job of editing. It looks like the crowd really enjoyed me just kind of being like, I'm
Right.
not doing
Right.
this.
Yeah.
And so those guys were amazing. And just a couple things they had to remove or adjust. But back to the original question, there was some nerves because I knew that second show would be where they had to pull the special line,
Yeah.
because the first one we just had to kind of kick it to the side. It was a good practice run. So
It is unique, I think, and comforting that the Dry Bar folks give you that input, ask you your feedback. Ultimately, they have the final say, right? But you kind of feel like you have a little bit more control than if you did a spot on, let's say, a Jimmy Fallon or a late night show, where you may not have as much pull on what they keep and what they edit. But your special was almost 24 minutes, so they didn't edit much out, which is great. And it is interesting with a unique laugh or a unique clap in an audience, because that makes it hard to edit sometimes. I guess with technology today they can do anything, but when you have that one, and then it's difficult to point out someone who's actually enjoying the show.
right, that's the thing. I mean, a lady, someone was like, "You think she's heckling?" I'm like, "No, this lady's just loving life, and she loves Dry Bar and shows up on a
Mhm.
regular basis." Because I've heard her on multiple ones, and and you see people commenting about it, whenever she does, and
Right.
hey, and you do, because I've done shows before where I wish I had someone that would dial up their laughter a little bit.
Of
Like, I
course.
appreciate you guys being so polite and giving me nice little chuckles and nods, but I need to know that you're with me. So can we have somebody to liven it a little bit? So having to find that nice median of engaging and filling the room with joy, but not to the point where it gets overwhelmed. So
Yeah,
it's a good.
sometimes during a show, when there's a really great laugher that's sort of above and beyond everyone else, and then there may be pockets of the room that are really not laughing loud. I stop the show and ask that person, "Hey, do you mind just jumping from table to table every once in a while?"
That's good. Yeah, we'll move them around. I did a church show not long ago for a good friend of mine, and his son has got like the most, for that infectious and contagious kind of laugh. It's just
Right.
little guys, only just like 6, 7, 8 years old, but I mean, it's just this barreling laughter. So the first joke I hit, and you hear that, and this little bitty guy up front, I was like, that threw me off. I said, I want to hire that guy to go on the road with me, because
Right.
even if I said it's garbage, it's going to sound wonderful as long as that kid's laughing. So,
It
but yeah,
seems to me that one of the most common weird laughs for a woman is sort of a cackle, and sometimes, and it almost always gets a laugh when I go, that sounds like the laugh you hear right before you get stabbed in the shower. You know what I mean? Like, because it's like that Norman, the Bates or whatever that movie,
yep.
and but then I, like I said before, I feel bad because I go, that's the way to go, Danny. Way to pick on the person laughing the most.
Mm.
Anything else you want to do to sabotage your career, your show? Well, let me ask you this, because then if you don't mind, I'll share my experience with doing shows in a church environment. Do you notice a difference in how you perform in not necessarily material wise, but with church crowds in a church setting or conference versus going to like the dry bar folks in that Provo club or a comedy club.
Well, so one of the things I guess it was a big difference is, I live church world. I'm a pastor, work with
Mm-hmm.
Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So I'm part of nonprofit Christian ministry. So that's the world I live in and have so much experience in, and have done most of my shows in. So I know I feel comfortable in a church setting because I know what works. I know what pushes the line, the things to dive into, the things to pull back from. So I'm very comfortable in church settings. So there's a better energy even coming off me.
Right.
When I went to dry bar, that I was not as loose in that setting as I am, when I go to work a church conference or
Mm-hmm.
like I just came from doing a spouse retreat. So now, if I probably worked in comedy clubs more and had been in that environment more and kind of knew how to read the room better, it would have helped in the dry bar setting. And I say I'm my own worst critic. I do
Yeah,
feel
we all
the
are.
dry
Yeah.
but just how I am. I mean, I've watched the thing 50 times, and there's times I watch and it's like, all right, that was good. It did go well. And then there's other times I watch it, I'm like, I hope they call me back so I can redeem myself. But
Yeah.
that's just the nature. There there needs to be a healthy bit of self reflection, feedback, criticism to make those adjustments. Because if not, you're in the comedy game 10 years and you're the same 10 years as you was in year one. So,
Yeah. I think
uh,
I have to be careful with audience members after a show that I don't feel, being your own worst critic. Sometimes you walk off stage and you're like, did not I'm not happy with what just happened up there. And then after the show, I'll be selling my merch or just meeting the folks after the show. And some folks will be like, great show. And I have to force myself to go, thank you.
mhm.
Instead of, no, it wasn't. I did this or I didn't do that. Like, because you don't want to take away from their compliment, even though in your head you're cutting yourself up. You know what I mean?
Well,
Oh,
one of the things I've found that has helped with and for me is I do try to record whether it be video or audio,
mm-hmm.
because in the moment I'm focused on the set and the delivery, and then there's been several shows where I just didn't feel like there was much connection, and the people weren't laughing. But then I go back and listen to it or watch it, and I was like, actually, those jokes hit better than I realized.
Right.
But then it's also good to kind of be like, okay, I've told that joke 3 times now, and nobody's responded. Let's kick that one out. But I've had to, I did a preacher's, well, all right, so it was a banquet the other day, and the banquet was to celebrate people who've been given a church planter. So they brought me in, and so most of the people were there to enjoy the meal and each other's company. But then
Right.
I was just brought into the mix of it, and so here we got a room 200 people in. Half of them's got their back to me because it's a round table setup.
That's
And
ideal for comedy, right?
absolutely, yeah. That's what when people ask, "What can we do to make the show better for you?" I was like, "Well, make sure before I get there, everybody gets a round table, so
And they're
that
done
way."
eating too. How about that?
So it was that one. It got in my head a little bit because this was a huge opportunity, but then half the room is not engaged at all.
Right.
And I was going back and listening to the audio, and I could tell like, okay, they're probably the front half of the room that was closest to me were listening and enjoying. So I'd tell the joke, you'd hear the laughter. After the laughter, you'd hear the rumble in the room, which was our back half.
Hmm.
And it took about 8 minutes. I did 20 minutes. It took about 8 before I finally noticed that the rumble stopped,
Right.
which I was talking to my wife about it. I was like, yeah, I knew that I was just going to have to pin back my ears, because when the guy who had put the banquet together was up there talking, people were just having their own conversations, living their best life. And I was like, if they're
Yeah.
not paying attention to the dude that paid the bill, who am I to think that I'm going to step up there
Yeah.
and everybody's going to be like, oh, here's Brandon. So yeah, this kept rolling, and about 8-9 minutes in, and I can tell from listening to the audio of it, like, okay, I got the full room's attention. It just took 8-9 minutes. I've compared it to street preaching. You're just out there just throwing
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
jokes,
Yeah.
and eventually somebody pulls up and listens. So
I think that this has become the number one thing I tell clients that look to hire me for comedy. I said, number one, I need an attentive audience. I'm the only option. There are no other options but to listen, right? And then I need a microphone. Because I've had people, we want to hire you for our family reunion at a restaurant. And I said, okay, well, let's talk. I can take your money, but these folks have not seen each other for at least a year, I'm guessing.
right,
And you're going to put them in a room and then expect them to listen to me for an hour instead of catching up and whatnot. So maybe we shorten the show. Maybe we don't have a comedian at your event or whatever. But yeah, I need an attentive audience, and I'll take care of the rest. What I asked the question about church crowd versus other types of crowd. What I found was interesting in my experience from doing a multitude of fairly large non-denominational churches, in a bigger setting, 2, 3, 4, 500 people, is I found it more difficult to do punchline and then tagline, 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 because from what my experience is, I do the punchline, they laugh, and then I want to keep that laughter rolling, so I have 2 or 1 to 3 taglines after. But the minute I start speaking again, they shut down.
Right.
And I noticed it's a bit of a condition from listening to a pastor. When the
Yeah.
pastor speaks, you're quiet. So I'm not the pastor, but I'm the guy with the microphone. So it's an interesting kind of timing and beat thing I had to work out. Like, let them finish laughing completely and then do the tagline. Not I'm trying to get the rolling laughter, but it was a little more challenging for me, at least from my experience. So that was an interesting kind of sound ear thing performing on stage.
Oh yes, yeah, definitely agree, and that makes sense because I know what you're talking about. Because you like to keep that momentum going, but they're just trained like, oh, he's speaking again,
Yeah.
and that was one of the things I can't remember which comedian it was talking about, like for me to slow down sometimes in the church setting,
Mhm.
like let the people get their laugh out
Yeah.
and then hit, instead of just charging, on ahead. So
Because I think they're a
that's
lot more generous too. It's oftentimes 100% of the time in a church setting, they are at the very minimum very attentive. That
mhm,
they are there to listen. So unlike a private gig or a comedy club where you have to kind of fight for their attention, so that's a win for us as performers to kind of we can slow down, we can do maybe more nuanced jokes
mhm.
that we wouldn't normally do in other settings, more clever stuff, more this or that. But yeah, I've had some very interesting gig opportunities that I've turned down just because I'm like, look, I want this to be as successful as possible, not only, for my reputation, but for the event. I don't want you to be the person that hired this comedian where no one listens to. And I've had that early in my career where no one listens to me. It's like I didn't even perform.
They're just getting in some reps, feeling like you're
Yeah,
working a
didn't
double
even get
time.
recognized. But you have so you're a fan, are you in Tennessee?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you're in the Nashville area ish?
Yes, sir. Just an hour south of there is where we're at.
Okay, okay, yeah. And you have your what I found interesting, one of the things interesting about your special is you mentioned you knew your wife for 4 months
Yes, sir.
and got married. I was like, wow, that's very
It's very Tennessee like, is it?
oh, I don't know. I don't know what it's like, but like I have a girlfriend, but I was married for almost 15 years before that. And I think we were dating for a year before we even got engaged. So 4 months. I mean, that's congratulations. I mean, you guys have kids together.
Yes, sir. Yeah, well, we just celebrated 14 years. We got a daughter that's 12, son that's 9. So yeah, it's going really well. What's the joke I kind of tell the folks is, when you get married, only knowing somebody for 4 months. I mean, it's easy making that transition because you're not tired of each other yet. So but we it's just been a blessed thing. We started dating and so you're met in March. We was engaged by June and then got married July 25th, and
Wow.
it's been a good times roll ever since. So.
What's the feedback you're getting from your kids and wife about your comedy?
Oh, they enjoy it. I mean, they know it is something that I'm passionate about, enjoy doing. It blesses other folks. They go with me to a lot of shows, even though they're going to hear it. I never do the same exact set twice, but I'll take things and I try to write a set everywhere I go. And so now it won't always be new jokes, but they just might be mixed up and
Right, right,
matched up differently. But they enjoy it. They enjoy the opportunity it gives us to meet new people and go connect with other churches or folks like that. So they have been very supportive, and I try to find a healthy balance, just between the pastoring and FCA and comedy. That
right,
most years I do about 30 to 40 shows, so I try not to be gone too much.
right,
And a lot of the stuff is in the southeast, so it's within a couple hours drive. So if they want to go with me, they can. So it doesn't
yeah,
take me away often, but they enjoy it, and they know it's something I'm passionate about and it helps
right.
other people.
And I think being a pastor, and even if you weren't a pastor, but because some people do this, but if being a pastor and doing a show at a church, you have the option to kind of potentially work in a message if they request,
Yes,
you
sir.
know.
And I enjoy doing it. I've had that opportunity on several times. During COVID, actually, one of the big things I did, I had one of my busiest months in April of 2020 because everybody was posting, hey, we're going to have Zoom prayer, Zoom Bible study, Zoom this, Zoom that. So I just started reaching out to pastors and I was like, hey, let me come on one night. This way you don't have to prepare anything. I'll do 20 minutes of comedy, roll that into five
Right.
to 10 minutes of encouragement, and a message. And so I ended up doing 14 or 15 shows from my living room that month,
Wow.
which I say it was a God prompting because, all right, so that April 2020, I started doing comedy December 2017. So April 2020 was going to be those first opportunities. I was going to be flown to places and just really excited. I was like, man, this is really about to take off. And then every time my phone rings, somebody was canceling on me. And I was like, I'm just
Right.
going to turn my phone off. So licked my wounds for a couple days, and then just kind of scrolling Facebook and seeing all this Zoom stuff, just kind of felt, hey, reach out to these guys and offer this. And so it went very well, just connecting in with people and just doing the comedy setting and preaching. And then I've had that opportunity in settings before. I mean, I've done comedy shows, rolled it into a message, and we have baptisms at the end. And I mean,
Oh,
that's a
wow.
kind of thing to showing that we can have fun and then kind of make that transition to deliver the gospel and then let God take it from there too. So
Yeah, yeah. I was rebaptized. I was baptized in a Catholic church as a kid, right, as a baby,
mm,
and then being a part of a non-denominational church as an adult. I just thought it was wild. They're like they set up these. It was impromptu. They all of a sudden they just had these tubs, and they're like, "Hey, we got shorts and t-shirts in the other room if you want to get baptized today." And then my now ex-wife and I that did just went in this broom closet and changed into these clothes and did it. It was great. I mean, it's such a different experience growing up in a very Catholic's very serene and quiet and still the same core beliefs, but definitely different.
oh yeah, different way of doing things for sure. I understand. That's
I
awesome.
and I think churches too, and this may help you as a pastor, I'm sure, is churches that hire entertainers and rightfully so are very hesitant to not hesitant, maybe overly due diligent on who they hand the microphone to.
Right.
Because they have the attention of their whole congregation for X amount of time. So you really need to be careful who you hire.
Yes, sir. Well, and that's the thing because I've had friends ask, because they've tried to get into doing church events, but they don't get any response back. And I get it. Like, I'm blessed with a good network. Part of the organization I'm part of is called United Pentecostal Church. So it's a bigger yet smaller pond. And there's a lot of people that are connected. And usually when I end up somewhere that I had no connection with the pastor, well, I find out, oh, well, this person has recommended me. But I've had friends that are like, how do you get church gigs? And I was like,
Right.
well, you've got to find the ones that trust you enough to give you the first opportunity.
Yep.
So what I always do is like, if someone invites me from church, I make sure to post about that I'm there. I make sure to post some stuff from when I'm there. And then I'll post my schedule occasionally showing what churches I'm going to be at because it is just a way for that next pastor to be like, well, if this guy and this guy trust him, well, then I
Yeah.
know we can too. And then he's not going to go in there and just create a dumpster fire. So that's why I tell guys like, find your closest group first, have them give you an opportunity, and if it goes well, they'll recommend you.
Yep.
And then which crowd you went over because they'll invite you back again too. And then
Yeah.
of course the only thing about church world, if it doesn't go well, you just pick up on it when it's been 4 years and you never got asked back. So like,
Yeah.
okay, well things must have not been clicking that well that night.
I
So
always I always stumble negotiating my fee with the church. I
yeah.
don't know whether my heart is bigger for the church or whatnot, but like I'm trying to find that balance of making a living and not
Mm.
blowing their budget, if there even is one. A lot of times churches will go, we really don't have a budget for it. But I'm trying to make a living, and it just feels weird to me negotiating with a church that I might be so fond of typically.
Yeah, and I could see, especially because if comedy is a person's full-time employment,
Right.
that it would because like I wouldn't be able to tell a church like, yeah, my fee's 2,000 or whatever. This I'm throwing out a random number. I'm
Right,
not,
right.
but so with most churches, of course, I'm doing this bivocationally. I mean, it's a part of my income. It's not the income. So if I have a church that all they can do is $500, well, it's not
Mhm.
like that's my only income for
Right,
that
like a
week.
love offering or something like that or whatever.
So this, and that's the thing with most churches. I just kind of let them know, like, well, here's kind of an average. And when they ask, like, well, what is your honorarium? I haven't really been in any setting where I've just been like, it has to be this. I just tell them, like, well, most people are kind of in the ballpark of this amount. Some go above, some go below, but this whatever works for you. So that kind of gives them an idea, like, okay, well, we need to be able to at least do in this
Right.
range.
Because you don't want to lose the gig too. That's a delicate balance as well. So you mentioned you did a joke about Pentecostal in your dry bar special, right? Did you mention there's no snakes or something like that or what? Now I
Yeah,
I found that funny without knowing much about Pentecostal church,
you
which
know
is
what
good.
what was funny about that was the one joke I'd actually asked them to take out because it was just kind of I never said that joke before, but in that moment it just kind of came out. Because then I got the thing, I was like, that's regional. And so where is it now? You are at? Where do you live at?
I'm in North Florida.
North Florida. Okay, so it's kind of a regional joke. Now the United Pentecostal Church that I'm a part of has never been involved in that whatsoever, and
Mhm.
that's the funny thing about it is because you just got this very small percentage of like East Tennessee, West Virginia, like the Appalachian area where you have these snake handling churches. And if there's ever a documentary that goes out about the Pentecostal church,
It's
it's
that.
always those crazy guys. And so yeah, just a very small group of them, but that's the ones that folks are like Pentecostal. Oh, that's a snake handling. Like when I was teaching, it was so funny because we had multiple times that snakes would get in the building, and most times they would end up in my room. So I'm just like, well, hey, I'm just going to gather them up. We'll have revival if that's okay with you guys. The thing is, I'm terrified of snakes. Like I can't even look at them on TV, but yet
Right.
it's like, oh, hey, go get the Pentecostal teacher. He's used to grabbing up snakes. I'm like, no, I'm not. But
Yeah, yeah. They
yeah,
always
that was
find the
just
worst. It's like they always find the worst. Like when you said that, if they're going to do a documentary or a snippet on the media about Pentecostal, they'll find the snake people. It's just like anything, like any news story. They always find the guy in the corner who made it through second grade. He's got three teeth left and he can barely speak. And this is North Florida, right? This guy.
yeah, this is the one that was going to represent all of us. So,
Right,
but yeah,
right.
just kind of threw that in the moment, and I asked them, and they said, "Oh, just go ahead." I said, "There'll be folks that get it," but yeah, that's that connection there. Is we definitely have a small pocket here in the southeast that is probably still involved with it. They're naturally weeding themselves out, realizing it's not a good idea to pick up rattlesnakes.
Yeah. Any backlash from congregants about you doing comedy with being a pastor?
So far, I haven't had. Of course, I'm sure there's people out there that don't agree with it, that kind of thing. But I think with most of my comedy being in church settings, that's probably why it's not as much
Right,
so.
right,
I would say if I was in settings where alcohol was being served, there might be some more kind of pushback on it. But
right.
it's been very well received, and say God is. I'd say it's just God has opened the doors, and I've spoken at a lot of different statewide events and those kind of things. So like for example, I just had the opportunity to do our general conference, which is a big event. You might have 10, 15,000 from around
Right.
the country. And when they invited me to be one of the speakers at a seminar they were having, wasn't a lot of honorarium to it, but the point behind it that I was excited about, I said, this gives credibility. This says if the leadership of the organization has enough faith to bring this guy in. And my session was called Laughter's the Best Medicine. So what I did was like 25, 30 minutes of comedy. And then I rolled it into how humor helps us to connect with people. And it turns
Sure.
into evangelism, discipleship, mentorship. And so the way I looked at it, though, is that people were like, hey, if the general leadership approves this guy, then it must be okay to have humor in the church. It must be okay to bring
Yeah.
this guy in so we can
It's
grow
just an
together.
extension of joy, bringing joy to folks.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and funniest thing though. So I'm all excited about this big moment. I've been asked to do this, and so I got there beforehand. Now they had these seminars set up, so each room might have 60 people in them. So I'm just standing there, and this couple comes in, and they're like, "Hey, what session's in here?" I was like, "Laughter's the best medicine." They was like, "Who's the speaker?" I was like, "Brandon Skelton." Not letting them know I'm the speaker. I'm like, "Brandon
Right.
Skelton." They're like, "Never heard of that guy," and they just walked out. I was like, all right, get me good and humble before we start. But I just love when stuff like that happens because I'm like, okay, that's going to be the first story I tell when we start this whole seminar
Yeah,
off.
yeah, yeah. It's a story of our life sometimes as comedians. Like, who is this guy?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what Nate Bargatze, I love when it was one of his specials, that one, probably his first Netflix, when he was talking about like he was at that time at a point in his career where some people know him and love him and but their friends don't. So it's like he has to explain, like when somebody's like, "Oh my goodness, there's Nate Bargatze," and and he's like, then I had to explain to their friend who I am and what I do.
Right,
So
right.
kind of that in between. So
I have a I remember I I was doing a string of shows here in town at the main comedy club, the Comedy Zone. This is many, many, many years ago, and it was well attended. There was some celebrity headliner, so it was sold out show Tuesday through Saturday. So by Saturday, I don't know, it was 600 people a night had seen the show, so 1,000 people had seen the show, and I was out to lunch with a family member. It was my mother, I think. We're at a restaurant, and there's a group of people just kind of looking at our table every once in a while, a little more than normal. And my mom's like, I think they recognize you as the comedian from wherever. So they come over, and one of them comes over and says, "Are you one of the comedians at the Comedy Zone this week?" I'm like, "No, no, I'm not. I probably look like him." And then another person comes over, and says the same thing. "Are you one of the comedians?" I'm like, "No, no, no, no." So my mom's like, "You really just should say it. Don't be so humble or whatever." So we're leaving the restaurant, and a group coming in stops and goes, "Ah, how do I know you? You look so familiar." And finally, I was like, "Well, I'm one of the comedians at the Comedy Zone." They're like, "No, that's not it. That's not where I know you from." I was like, I go, "You see, this is why I don't do it."
oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
But yeah, so look, your special is Having Kids Wrecked My Body, which is probably one of my favorite titles of a special. Did you have alternative titles or no?
You know, I the only I'd thought about one I'd thought about because I do that joke talking about um, if I go to the beach, I'm a 4 or 5, but if I go to Disney, I'm a solid 7.
Right.
I thought about I'm a solid 7, but then I was asking my wife about it. I was like, what do you think is the best one as far as just a title that will even get a laugh to the point where people be like, I
Yeah.
think I want to go watch the special. She's like, you got to do Having Kids Break My Body.
Yeah.
I was like, all right. So yeah, listen to her counsel, and I'm glad I did because I like that title better than even the I'm a solid 7.
Yeah. One other thing. You mentioned honorarium, which is what the church asks, when they want to know how much you cost. And years ago, my first church gig ever negotiating, they asked what my honorarium, and I didn't know what that word meant. Like, "What's your honorarium?" And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, "Well, I honor God. I honor uh like I didn't know what." And so I'm like Googling it while I'm on the phone. I'm like, "Oh, the fee. The fee. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Got it."
Yeah,
But
but
look,
got to
so people can find your special on drybarcomedy.com, the app or the site. And if they use your name, Brandon Skelton, all together, they should get a month free, right?
yes, sir.
Do you have a website, or social media people should check out?
Yeah, so social medias on Facebook, it's the Church Comedian Brandon Skelton.
Okay.
Uh, Instagram is the Church Comedian, and then YouTube is I think I got the full name in there, Church Comedian Brandon Skelton. So that's the three main platforms that I work. YouTube, I put a lot like the videos record. I don't upload everything I do, but I'll pick a few shows every now and then or parts of shows and like put
Yeah.
those on there. And
Yeah.
then Facebook and Instagram is where I drop some reels and or just the occasional just funny post about stuff. So that's
Yeah.
my
You
three.
can find a ton of clips out there that I watched. You can watch his Huckabee set, which is not only a good set, it's filmed much like, I mean, the quality is the same as a dry bar comedy. It's amazing quality and a good when you did Huckabee, was Huckabee there? Because the announcer came out
Yeah.
after
So
you.
right, I did the opening. So this was the
Like the
non
warm up.
televised. Just did the warm up. But Governor Huckabee was backstage. He was behind the curtain, so he listened to it, and it was really neat because then I come back or well, just the general. Somebody gets that opportunity. He's amazing. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
beforehand, I had the meal prepared. He comes out, gets to meet you. Well, he was standing backstage. So as I came off, he was there. He's like, man, that was a great set. And one particular joke that I wrote with him in mind was a joke about Nancy Pelosi, and he's like,
Yeah.
man, I really like that Nancy Pelosi joke. I said, well, I wrote that for you too.
That has to be intimidating too, to meet a former presidential candidate.
Yeah, and I say he was always just one that definitely have admired him and just appreciate what he does, what he stands for. So it was a huge honor just to get to be on there, and then I had the chance to meet him. And even, let's see here, before I went on there, though, me and him had connected because I was on, a friend of mine had a podcast and he got to interview Governor Huckabee. So I got to be in
Mhm.
on that interview. So kind of helped me get past those nerves of the first introduction kind of thing. But yeah, it was awesome just getting to meet him and be on a show and just that whole experience as well because they do things first class.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that you took the time out to chat. I appreciate you taking the time out. I hope everyone goes out and listens to this. Brings it to number one. It's top five, right? So by the time this gets published, hopefully it's already there. But maybe it's we can do this. Brian Bates, he's the episode before you. His is number one now, I think. So we have to knock him down a couple
That's what
notches.
when I saw the release of it, I said, "All right, Jeff Allen's the week before, and Brian Bates is 2 day after." I said, this is where I'm seeing what I'm made of right now. If I can hang with these guys, so yeah, Jeff is second, and of course he's been at number one. Brian at number one
Yeah.
now, and I was like, "Hey, if I'm going to be behind a couple guys, those are the ones to be behind." So
Yeah.
they're
What's
all
Jeff Allen's called? Gunsmoke and ice cream or something like that.
yes, sir.
It's so funny. I'm trying to get him as a guest, obviously, on this podcast, and then I'm just scrolling through his social media and I see he's on Good Morning America. I'm like, I don't know, I don't stand a chance of getting him on.
He is so down to earth that one of the cool things that I don't think he's been doing it recently, or he may still be, but he used to open up his home on Tuesday night. Tuesday night, I believe it was. I can't remember if it was weekly or once a month. It may have just been once a month. But any comedians from the area that wanted to come over to his house and hang out with him and just work material,
Oh wow.
uh, they did. And so I had the opportunity. I did go once, got the memes, just kind of see the setting of things, and you just bring some jokes to the table, and they kind of help write them, say, okay, you should add to this, you should take this away, this is how you should deliver. But just for a guy that level, but he's so humble and he's all about
Yeah.
empowering and other comedians out there.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I exchanged some messages with him and then his manager too. So we're still working on it, but I just found it very funny that I was like, I'm going to get him on my podcast, and then he's on Good Morning America. I'm like, well, maybe I have a little bit more to wait because
hey,
he's
keep
got
on
that
trying.
book. That book he just launched a book, so that's a big thing for him. I don't know what the name of the book is yet, but all right. Well, look, I can talk to you all day. Don't want to keep you, but if you don't mind hanging out a few minutes, once we stop recording here, and so appreciate you coming on to Behind the Bar.
Oh man, it's been my pleasure, sir.